So, Pastor Fred, without further ado, you can share your screen, whatever you want to do.
All right. Well, welcome everybody.
Following
Yeah, my name's Pastor Fred. I'm at Unity Lutheran Church in Edgewater, and it's so good to see you all this morning. Many thanks to Rabbi Marantz, who got us started and took on the burden of at least a week's hosting this meeting. So this is my first time, so bear with me. But yeah, let me share my screen and let's see if this works out today. Don't think we have to worry about sound. Oops, don't need that. All right. ECRA Circle of Solidarity and Mourning. This is a summons to prayer and a call to action. So I love that juxtaposition that the rabbi set us to and challenged us with. To me, it feels like we're in the summons to prayer together, and we're still working on the call to action. But let me know how you guys feel. Today, I want to especially highlight the Emmanuel 9, as we're calling them in the Lutheran Church, the martyrs from 2015, 5 years ago. Today is the anniversary day of this horrible and tragic shooting at their church in Charleston, South Carolina. It was also a Wednesday. A lot of congregations, of course, have some kind of church night on Wednesday. I know we have like Lenten services always on Wednesdays. A lot of churches like Emmanuel have prayer service every Wednesday night, so I think pretty much year round. And that's what they were doing that night when they were gathered together, 12 people in prayer and Bible study. When this young man, an avowed white supremacist, came in and actually sat through an hour at least of their Bible study before pulling out a weapon and shooting some 70 rounds and killing 9 out of 12 people there. It's kind of unimaginable and hard to fathom even 5 years ago. So we want to remember them today. In the Lutheran Church, we've made this a commemoration day because the killer was a Lutheran himself. He was born and raised a Lutheran. I don't really know anything about his church upbringing specifically, but that he was raised in an ELCA Lutheran church feels like a weight for us. And so we've made this a commemoration day. And here is the statement that our Lutheran Church developed to make a short description of who we celebrate or who we remember and who we and what happened that day, why we remember and commemorate this day. Would someone like to read this for us? I see Michael with his mic off and ready to go.
I wouldn't say I'm ready to go, but yes, I can read it. On June 17, 2015, Clarence C. Pickney, Cynthia Marie Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton, Dr., Tawanza Saunders, Daniel Lee Simmons, Sharandra Coleman Singleton, and Maria Thompson were murdered by a self-professed white supremacist while they were gathered for Bible study and prayer at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, often referred to as Mother Emmanuel, in Charleston, South Carolina. Pastor Pickney and Simmons were both graduates of the Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary. Resolution to commemorate June 17th as a day of repentance for the martyrdom of the Emmanuel Nine was adopted by the Churchwide Assembly, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America on August 6, 2019. Congregations of the ELC are encouraged to reaffirm their commitment to, I'm going to raise this up. Can you raise your screen up?
No.
Okay. 'Cause I'm going to lose the bottom. Committed to repenting of the sins of racism and white supremacy, which continue to plague this church, to venerate the martyrdom of the Emmanuel Nine, and to mark this day observance with I can't read, with study and prayer. Sorry, I got it all in.
You did. I'm so sorry. That doesn't fit on the
No, it's not
sentence.
on you. It's not on you, Alex. It's. I'm doing this on my phone, so just.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha. But thank you, Michael, for reading that. And every day we've been adding about 10 names, and these are 9 more names for us to hear their names, to remember and commemorate them. This is how the church looked, the front sidewalk in the days after the shooting 5 years ago. As Michael read, could hear also two of those who died that day were also pastors. I believe Reverend Pinckney was the senior pastor. And 2 of them were trained at one of our Lutheran seminaries that's in South Carolina. So that's another reason that it's important for us in the Lutheran Church to remember. These were highly talented people. Reverend Pinckney was also a state senator in South Carolina, and just a very talented leader, as I understand it. So today we remember 5 years later, these 9 folks. Here's pictures. It's not very good. Sorry for the blurriness. I just got this off the internet. It's a JPEG that does not translate too well. In the top left, you can see Clementa Pinckney, who was a pastor and state legislator. Next to him, DePayne Doctor. I just read an article this morning about her that her cousin wrote, who's also a pastor. It was very interesting and heartfelt. Because I remember after the shooting, personally, in the news was stories about when Dylan Roof was brought to trial, the shooter. When he was first charged, and most of the media was about how at least one of the family that was there talked about how God forgives him and I forgive you. And the press kind of took that one person's statement and ran with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. And
Yes, I do.
yeah, but there are others, weren't there. They did not forgive him. And this article that was just written recently and I read this morning was all about that, and how she still feels she does not need to forgive him. Not that she's not looking for reconciliation and for healing, but that the mourning and the experience of sorrow and tragedy for the families that have been left is just still so sharp and overwhelming, that needs to be lifted up first, that we need to understand that kind of pain and loss before we just wash over it. and go to forgiveness. God does forgive, but our humanity calls us to commemorate and to stand with people that are hurting, and those that their families have been victimized. We need to remember that first. So that really struck me. I mean, I remember, my own confession is I remember doing a sermon talking about that story of forgiveness, and it kind of symbolizes God's marvelous grace. But we can't wipe away the history of white supremacy and racism in our country that, as we know, stands to this day, and that we need to shine a light on and to find a way to overcome. We need to find a way to be anti-racist today before we can move on and forget and the ways that just kind of lets white supremacy continue on. So we continue to remember and commemorate and say their names: Clementa C. Pinckney, Cynthia Marie Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton, Dr., Tawanza Sanders, Daniel Lee Simmons, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, and Myra Thompson. I took this from a longer piece that is from intern pastor in our Lutheran church. She's here in Chicago. In fact, she's interning at a Lutheran church in Logan Square, where I live, Ellie Dowd. And this was posted just this month by Racial Justice Ministries. Someone want to read this to us? Sister Mary Jean, can you read this?
Okay. Oh, I lost. Sorry, I just lost it. This happened yesterday. I lost my picture.
Okay. Let's see. Who else do we have? Dr. Jane Steinfels, can you read for us?
Sure. I felt my stomach sink when I found out that Dylan Roof was raised in an ELCA church. I imagined that the church Roof grew up in was full of good and faithful people. From what I know, many people there are horrified about what Roof did. Our church may not have taught him white supremacy directly, but like many of our churches and beloved institutions, it did not do enough to teach him to resist it. His formation within the ELCA was not enough to teach him to recognize the image of God in the people who would become his victims.
Thank you. Yeah, that really touched me. That seems to be kind of the moment that we're in right now. We haven't done enough in our Lutheran churches and other churches, I suspect as well, that to teach people to resist the white supremacy in our society. And our Lutheran church is still overwhelmingly white, some 90% so we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Pastor Fred?
Yes.
I'm reminded of a moment at the Museum of Tolerance in Los Angeles where I had a choice to go into two different doors. One said prejudice, one said not prejudice. So thinking I was woke, I tried to get through the door that says not prejudice. It was locked. So I had to go through the other door that said prejudice. And he learned all about implicit biases and things like that. But one thing that comes away from that experience that really pertains now is how sometimes we objectify things like racism, even anti-racism. We talk about it as an it. And I think we have to change that way of thinking and speaking. One of our action plans must be to recognize that we possess racism, and that anti-racism isn't just something that we acquire. It's something that we embrace inside our very hearts and in our very deeds. And something we have to admit, right? We have to admit to prejudice. We have to admit to racism. If you want to be anti-racist, you have to admit that we have the capacity for racism, and not just to fight against it, which is only part of the action. You have to embrace it as a reality if you're going to fight against it. Can't pretend that it's somewhere else outside of us or part of some systemic reality that we're not a part of. We are a part of that. It is in us.
All right. Excellent. Yeah. That's hard to do and hard to admit sometimes even, but yeah, we are a part of the problem and we need to be part of the solution. Yeah. It's part of everything that we're a part of in a way, I guess. What I wanted to do is to say this lament together here, that we can kind of mourn and lament and confess our sin of racism. So I'm looking again for some readers here. And love to have some of our new people read.
Eileen.
Eileen?
Hello. All right.
Hi. Welcome. Great to see you. Can you see the screen? Are you able to read this, Eileen?
Yes, I can see the screen. I'm able to read.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The sin of racism hurts communities of color, fractures human relationships, and denies God's good creation. Lament is a way for us to recognize the harm caused by racism. We are all created in the image of God, called to act with equity, fairness, and justice. God's loving kindness creates grace-filled spaces within us and within our relationships and leads us toward becoming anti-racist.
Thank you. And Ruben, would you like to read this screen?
Within the whole human family, people of color have experienced both interpersonal aggression and structural oppression instead of abundant life. We recognize and lament the harm racism has caused to African descent communities, American Indian and Alaskan Native communities, Indigenous people within Canada, Arab and Middle Eastern communities, Asian and Pacific Islander communities, and Latinx communities. We cry out to you. Hear our lament, O God.
Lament, O God. Thank you. Who else hasn't had a chance to read yet? Got everybody? Rabbi Craig, please.
First, Pastor Kinsey, let me thank you and our fellow ECRA colleagues, Reverend Ware and Dr. Steinfels, Sister Mary Jean Hayes. We're pleased to be here with you and our lay people, and I'm really inspired to see our group expanding, and nice to see you, Pastor Kinsey, in the lead today. And thank you for very compelling memorial to the Emmanuel Nine, and an inspiring call, not only to prayer, but to action, internal action, to make the world better and to make it more anti-racist. And so I thank you very much. Thank you all very much for being
Thank
here.
you.
So, we have assigned the notion of race to human beings created in God's own divine image. We have judged God's beautiful diversity by our flawed and artificial standards. We cry out to you.
Hear our
Hear our
lament,
lament.
O God.
We have used language and images in ways that equate black and dark with dirt and sin, and that fail to welcome the treasures of darkness in God's good creation. We cry out to you.
Hear our lament, O God.
We have accepted practices in our congregations and in our society that privilege whiteness over diversity and equity. We have been complicit in how racism continues to exclude and harm people of color. We cry out to you.
Hear our
Hear our
lament,
lament,
O
O
God.
God.
There's one or two more screens here. Michael, do you want to read? Or maybe too difficult?
As we reconsider what we have been taught about race and racism, we call to you.
Hear
Open
Our hearts,
our
O
hearts,
Oh
O God.
As we contemplate what we have done and what we have left undone, we call to you.
Open our
Open
hearts,
our
O
hearts,
God.
O God. And as we labor to create a loving and safe community for our siblings of color with you,
Open our
open
hearts.
our hearts,
O God.
O God.
Jane, you want to close us out?
Holy and merciful God, as your people, we recommit ourselves to loving one another as you have loved us. Prepare us for this time of listening and discovery. We pray in the name of the one God who has made us one. Amen.
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 Questions that kind of came to mind for me are, how have we accepted practices in our congregation or in society that privilege whiteness over diversity and equity? And how can we develop anti-racist practices in our congregations that institute equity? I don't know, I just want to throw that out there with everybody. Maybe I'll stop the screen share so we can see each other. Anybody have any thoughts or reactions? I know so far, I think in my congregation, we've just tried to start the discussion, what it is to be an anti-racist. We've had one discussion and we've got another one tonight. I kind of wanted to take up, a slightly different theme than this today, but to talk about the defund police slogan that is being chanted in the streets, and it's actually been around for a while. So that's one way that in my congregation I want to make sure we're talking about the issue of anti-racism.
Fred, for me, I think what happens is, particularly your questions are very pointed, because what happens is, in the midst of what's happened with the Black Lives Matter movement over these last few weeks, the conversation has been high, it's been heated, we'll start some groups at our churches. What I tend to find is that what we do to make it complicit is that in a short while, just like the public seems to take a quiet step, we do the same in the church. That what happens is, after a period of time, we will not continue to have a group that is looking at racism. We will do a small, maybe a racism group in the fall whenever we come back together. We'll do this online. But then as things die down, the church falls into the same step as society. We tend to forget the poor. We tend to forget the disenfranchised in that manner. And so what happens is we go back to the easier question, which is to go to the global needs of the world and continue to miss our brothers and sisters that we walk with every day. And I know that's what I experienced at North Shore, is that, we tend to put it in a box. And I think that's one of the biggest sins we commit as the church, is that we do not keep the conversation going until it's done. We go to a point and then we say, we're good. And I think that's one of the biggest things, one of the biggest sins of the church, is that we do not keep the conversation going for ourselves until it's done. Because we'll say, well, so-and-so, they're tired or they're bored or they don't want to be engaged. Well, too bad. Jesus didn't stop doing the same things for 3 years because people got bored or they weren't interested. And that's what we do as a church. So that would be my response to those two questions combined.
Yeah.
So wrestling with this, I think one of the things that is helping our Sacred Heart community is that our religious sisters are an international order, and the fact that kind of the whole world is looking at us right now is keeping us honest, in that our sisters and communities around the world are reaching out to us and saying, hey, what are you doing? And, how can we, so that instead of us looking at the ministries that, we've supported, building a school in Uganda, or, kind of, as you point out, Michael, that we look at the rest of the world and kind of how we're going and fixing things elsewhere instead of dealing with our own. And so I think, and our superior general, our head nun in Rome, is actually an American, and she's actually really making a concerted effort to we need to discuss this as Americans and our role in it. And the other, kind of related, but so in 2018, we celebrated that Sacred Heart came here 200 years ago with Philippine Duchenne, and had this great big year of celebration. And in this great big year of celebration, we learned that in Philippine, kind of making her way up the Mississippi from Louisiana into Missouri, that there were enslaved peoples who the Society of the Sacred Heart benefited from their work. And so this year of celebration became really a time of wrestling and owning our legacy and what we've benefited from, and that the school on Sheridan Road was built because the Society of the Sacred Heart had the funds to do that. And part of why they had the funds to do that was because of the work of people who were not paid, who were not cared for, who were not. So, I mean, we've, our work is nowhere near done, but I mean, it's something that, like, we as a community really are trying to wrestle with and accept the challenge of, and try to, and how do you fix this? How do we, whether it's our community in Chicago or whether it's communities elsewhere, like, how do we do this work? So, I mean, I think that the question about white privilege, I mean, so much of it has to do with the story of who we are and how we came to be, and our, anyway, I realize that's not a complete thought, but that's where we're wrestling in our community.
Yeah, and so maybe there's some potential for a more long-term project, or not dropping the issue altogether. Yeah, I think that's so great, Michael and Jane, that, I really feel you, Michael, that these things often just come and go, and not just often, but always. It's like in the news and it's hot for a while, and then, as so often happens in the American news cycle, it passes to something else. So giving thanks that there's still demonstrators out there after more than 2
Amen.
weeks, and that it hasn't gone away yet. But I really fear the same thing too. One thing we've been talking about in our mental health justice team at One North Side is how to make this our front and center issue in every campaign we do. That how do we see racism in whatever issue we're dealing with, so that we continue to ask those questions with the campaign every time. And it's kind of made my thinking a little bit different, I think, anyway, that you really could do that if you really wanted to be an anti-racist. Every issue in social justice is tied into racism in some way, and so we need to we need to make that the centerpiece issue, or at least at the center of the question. And when we deal with politicians and policy, that has to be there. Otherwise, we're not doing the work of anti-racism. So it's kind of energized me a little bit that might be possible. We might not drop it this time.
I pray we don't. I apologize, but I'm going to have to get off the call. I have a 9 o'clock meeting that I have to go to, which is actually not at my house, which is where I'm at now. So I do apologize. So when I disappear, don't be offended.
All right.
Thank you, Reverend Blair. Thank you, Michael. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
All right. I'm open to other contributions. Otherwise, I have kind of a shorter litany to end us with as well.
Pastor Kinsey?
Yes.
I would only say that, at least from Emmanuel's standpoint, and not speaking for the entire congregation, but I'm trying to model a couple of things that I think are important. One is to own my own racism. Even though I champion B'Tselem Elohim, that we are all created in God's image, we're all full of intrinsic worth, there are ways that I'm not always aware of not extending that more broadly. It's not a virulent act, but it's an act for which I am still culpable. Benign, virulent, doesn't matter. I'm still responsible. I want others to be responsible. I want to be matter of fact that I possess not only the capacity for racist behavior, but I possess that behavior and have to honestly confront it daily. And this is just the fact of life. And we just need to embrace it and deal with it, right? And the other thing, and Reverend Ware and I were talking about this, when the cameras are off, are we going to engage in a consistent practice over time?
Mm-hmm.
When the emotions somehow level off, if that can happen. I hope they don't, but human nature says that they will level off. People get distracted with other commitments, other things that are important as well. Or are we going to be consistent over time? The purpose of this circle, at least in the immediate moment, is to create a consistent effort daily that allows us to consider these important realities and to do something about them and to figure out what our plan is going to be once we change our particular intensity of practice. Are we going to be able to come back to this in some shape, way, or form to keep consistent effort over time? If not daily, then weekly or monthly or yearly or some combination. And the other thing is, are we going to get proximate with victims of racism so that we can build real empathy? If we can do that, then I think we'll sustain this effort and the revolution will take hold over time and create real change in society and build a more anti-racist society.
Amen. All right. If there's no other comments at this time, Thank you again. Let's see if we can close out with this litany. I know we're pushing our time limit here. Let's see. All right. The witness of the Emmanuel Nine, a litany of remembrance for their vocations. So we want to remember that these were 9 people, very talented, very leaders in their community, and they had vocations. Let me start us off here. The Emmanuel Nine of blessed and eternal memory were 9 gifted, loving, and faithful people who spent their lives striving for excellence, connection, and the presence of God, and spent their last moments in study of the Word. They leave a legacy of grace, resistance, family, and faith. Elaine, do you want to continue for us?
Sure. One moment. Let me just get it up on the screen there.
See, okay?
Yep. Thank you. Gracious God, in remembering their lives and witnesses, we are called to a wider understanding of the Spirit's work in the world. They were preachers. Open us to hear and respond to your word. They were students. Kindle in us a desire to learn and grow in your ways. They were teachers. Instill in us a passion to share your wisdom. They were coaches. Accompany us as we strive to run the race set before us.
All right. Ruben, do you want to read?
They were mentors. Inspire us through the wise counsel offered by others. They were leaders. Embolden us to seek out the best in others. They were musicians. Attune us to the sounds of your creation. They were poets. Reveal your truth in language we have yet to discover. They were barbers. Shape us as attentive caregivers to those around us. They were custodians. Protect those whose work,
Oops, all right.
yes, whose work ensures our safety.
Jump the gun. Ben, I don't know if you got to read yet. Thanks for being with us. Ben, would you like to read?
Sure, I'd be very happy to. Are we starting off that they were bus drivers?
Yeah.
They were bus drivers, carry us as companions in life's unexpected journeys. They were veterans, remember those who risk harm for the sake of others. They were librarians, write on our hearts and minds the wisdom of the generations. They were advocates, call us to speak and act on behalf of those who are silenced. They were public servants, show us how to love our neighbors as ourselves. They were legislatures, inscribe your laws of love and justice on our hearts.
Excellent. Jane, do you want to close us out?
In lives of faithful dedication, your servants Clementa, Cynthia, Daniel, DePayne, Ethel, Myra, Sharonda, Susie, and Tawanza lived by your promises, sharing their gifts with those in their families and communities. May we not forget their lives taken too soon. In the years to come, let us share their names and their witness, so that the world comes to know of your Spirit at work in and through them. We ask this in the name of the one who is our shalom, salam, and peace. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today and for helping me and us Lutherans and all of us to commemorate the Emmanuel Nine. Excellent discussion. Appreciate our circle of solidarity and mourning. Thank you again, Rabbi Marantz.
Thank you, Pastor Kinsey. We look forward to your leadership again tomorrow. And then Dr. Steinfels, you're on for Friday. And for Friday, which is June 19th, Friday?
Friday.
So Friday, June 19th is Juneteenth. And so it's a powerful, powerful moment for us to recognize. And so thank you. And just a bit of housekeeping before we close. When we have a leader, we'll have a live experience. When we don't have a leader, we'll have something that is recorded by an individual, whether it's me or one of our other clergy in ECRA, one of our other partners in ECRA. There'll be something. We'll try to represent daily some advancement of our conversation, some continuation of our practice. Important that we establish a discipline here. Discipline is the key to our success in anti-racism. Consistency over time. Struggle on. Stay well. Stay in the fight.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Glad you all joined us. Really a blessing. Take care.
Thank you.